Hi, I'm Albert Glinsky. I'm the author of the biography of Leon Theremin, Theremin, Ether Music and Espionage. If you don't know what a theremin is, you've probably heard a theremin. You've certainly heard a theremin on old movie soundtracks if you've ever heard The Lost Weekend or Spellbound, or if you've heard certain sci-fi films from the 1950s. It's that familiar kind of squealing, wailing sound that sometimes goes along with the violins and is supposed to create an eerie mood. It's certainly the most unique instrument that's ever been invented. When Leon Theremin first created this instrument and started taking it around and demonstrating it in Russia in the 1920s, it created a sensation. He brought it to Europe and it created a sensation, and he brought it to the United States and it created a sensation, probably because it's the only instrument that you actually play without physically coming into contact with any part of the instrument. It's all played with your hands moving through the air. So one day in the laboratory, when he was working on a device to measure the density of gases, Theremin decided to, instead of just having a meter on there to reflect the density of the gases, he also decided to put a kind of whistling device on there that would actually change pitch depending on the density of the gas. And then as he was working with it, he found the same principle of radios of that time, which many people are familiar with, that the natural body capacitance affects the circuit in such a way that not only was the whistle going off for the density of the gases, but the introduction of his hand into that field would also affect the overall pitch. And so he got it to the point where he could actually play a melody on it through the introduction of his hand into the electromagnetic field around the gas meter, called other people from the laboratory around and said, "You've got to hear this." And so, of course, the next step was to actually build the vertical and horizontal antennas. Originally, he had a foot pedal, and then eventually he thought it would be so much more intriguing to have the hands just purely in the air. So that's where he developed the first prototype theremin. So the brilliance of this technology is that Leon Theremin determined that if you have an electrical field around this antenna and it's connected to a circuit, and you have an electrical field around this antenna connected to another circuit, then by bringing your hands near these electrical fields, you are actually altering these electrical fields in such a way that it affects the circuits, and these circuits eventually go to something that is going to produce an analog sound that comes out of a speaker, and you will hear it. So your hands moving through these invisible electromagnetic fields will actually create the sound. On the original theremin, as Leon Theremin designed it, the tone was very close to a sine wave, which means very few harmonics and therefore not a very rich sound, more of a pure sound. So that's the general principle of the theremin. The theremin is a monophonic instrument, which means that it only produces one sound at a time. So I often compare that to singing in the shower, without the shower, just the singing. One tone at a time. We can't play harmony on this, although today we can use this as a MIDI controller and there are other applications of the theremin. But the basic theremin produces one tone at a time. This is our pitch antenna, so anything we do in relation to this antenna with our hand affects whether it's a low note or a high note. This is our volume antenna here, and this is not only the way that we create louder or softer volume, but the way that we can chop up the sound over here into individual notes. The little knob here that says pitch, what that means is it controls the amount that the electromagnetic field expands or contracts from this antenna, therefore how it relates to the electrical capacitance in a particular person's body mass. So we're going to get a tone here. Here's a tone. I'm not doing anything. And then I am going to do this. I'm turning the knob, and I want the lowest possible note right here at where my hand is near the shoulder. Now if I turn the knob the other way, you see I'm not doing anything, but it's putting a higher note back here. But I want the lowest possible note right here. Now I should have the full range of the instrument. And you can see it's quite a few octaves. And it is really essentially a siren. So you have this basic siren sound like this. And we want to then chop that up into individual parts using the volume antenna so that we can create individual notes like this. That kind of idea. So otherwise, if we didn't do that, we would just have, and we'd have that slide between notes. But this is very responsive volume antenna, and you can truly cut the sound off very nicely, like that. So that's the way we chop it up into individual notes. That way we could actually play something that is relatively musical, such as a scale. We can also add a vibrato to the sound like this. Now we want to be careful not to do the vibrato forward like this, or we will actually change the pitch of the note, but vibrato is generally done side to side like that. Bob Moog added a few knobs on the ether wave here, allowing you to change the nature of the sound a little bit and make it a little bit richer. So, for instance, there is a brightness control here. I'm going to show you one extreme. So here is the brightness knob in one position. And now brightness adjusted differently. And now I'm going to adjust the waveform a little bit. This is one extreme of the waveform. And now with the dial all the way to the other side, waveform. So a different sound quality essentially. Playing the theremin does involve a great deal of skill, as you can probably tell. It was originally advertised in 1929 when Radio Corporation of America designed the first commercial theremins as something that was easy to play. All you had to do was wave your hands in the air. But as people learned very quickly, waving your hands in the air was a far cry from being a musician or creating anything that sounds like music. The theremin is a very difficult instrument to play, but as a result, it gives a great deal of satisfaction for those people who actually have mastered it or have come close to mastering it. The theremin has been used in all different types of music and is a very current instrument that is past, present, and future.